And welcome back to another episode of Undefeated. I am your host, Bree Franklin. I am the co-founder, president, and CEO of the Prosperity Project, which is bringing you Undefeated. And today we have a robust conversation that is going to get into a totally new terrain, a very unique niche of our general conversation. So if you're new here, welcome. It's a delight to have you as part of our audience. If you don't know, I started the Prosperity Project, and that led to Undefeated as a result of my painful lived experience of being dragged through the mud of owing crippling student loan debt. So I came out of undergrad several years ago with about $100,000 in student debt principal, which quickly ballooned to $116,000 due to the two eyes of interest and ignorance. And that set me so far behind in terms of just basic milestones as a young adult. And so having lived with those pain points, that was very challenging to endure. So I was able to transcend those barriers just through deciding that I was no longer going to let that define me. And so that's what sparked the Prosperity Project in summer of 2020. And here we are, almost 4 years later, which is unbelievable, doing work that now entails helping pay this knowledge forward and sharing our experiences and our stories with others and those of you who have reached out to us to ask for help. So please keep those inquiries coming. Today, we're going to be talking about master's degree mayhem. So this is going to be a subject that our guest is an expert in. I personally do not have a master's, and we'll get more into why as the episode goes on. But if you are not aware, master's degree debt is quickly becoming a major factor in the student debt bubble equation. Right now, student loans in totality are projected to hit $3 trillion by 2042, and a four-year degree is set to cost about $430,000 by 2035. So if those statistics alarm you, as they should, then definitely tune in because we've got a great conversation coming your way. So to go ahead and introduce today's guest, who I'm fangirling. I'm going to try to keep a professional demeanor during this conversation. We have the one and only Sarah Kauss, who is the founder and the inventor of Swell Water Bottle, which is a reusable insulated product. So you've probably seen the very popular sleek design on store shelves everywhere. Uh, Sarah was raised in Jupiter, Florida by parents who were small business owners. She received a bachelor's in accounting from the University of Colorado Boulder and her MBA from Harvard Business School. After receiving her bachelor's, she was a CPA for Ernst & Young. She then moved into commercial real estate. She's made so many lists, so many recognitions. She was featured in Fortune's 40 Under 40 list in 2014, Business Insider's 100 list, and so many others. You might have seen her across CNN Money, CNBC, Entrepreneur, Inc. magazine, the list goes on. So without further ado, so excited to welcome to Undefeated Sarah Kauss.
Thanks, Bree. I'm so honored to be here, and thank you for pulling this together. It's such an important topic, and I'm really glad to lend my voice in a small way to the important thing that you're working on.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm just grateful that you found this opportunity worthwhile. I don't know if Kendra, who is, for those who are unfamiliar with this, Kendra is on Sarah's team, and I reached out after hearing your how I built this episode, and you were the only taker. Like I was trying to listen out for those who had mention of their debt experience on their entrepreneurial journey. And when I got the email saying that you were interested, I couldn't believe it. So I appreciate your willingness to even lend your voice to this conversation.
I'm glad to be here today.
Yes. So to dive in, obviously this, is an experience that you've had through your master's degree, which is, hence the episode title. So if you would just walk us through what that journey was like going from undergrad to grad school, what motivated the decision, and then of course, what that debt journey entailed in your case.
Sure. So you mentioned on that lovely bio of mine that I grew up in Jupiter, Florida, and I really wanted to go away for university. I loved the small town where I was from, but I was ready to seek new landscapes. So I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder for my undergrad, and I was an accounting major, so I was a CPA. I worked at Ernst & Young, which is now EY in Denver, and then also in LA. And I enjoyed my job, but I didn't find a lot of meaning in what I was doing. I lived in a very small apartment in LA. I was saving as much as I could because I was still paying off my undergrad loans, having racked up a fair amount of that over the course of my time in Boulder. Um, but I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs on their finances and their taxes at the time. And what I really wanted to do was jump over the table and become one of my clients, not stay up all night working on their tax returns, but really become someone that I would be, maybe someday in the future, but I didn't know how to get there. And
Mm.
every time I'd have a meeting with my clients, I would say to them, how did you get in this position? And one of the things that seemed to be ongoing theme with the entrepreneurs was business school. And I really got it in my mind that I thought if I went off and got my MBA, it would give me almost a gift of time in addition to more business education, but a gift of time to try to come up with some entrepreneurial ideas to start a company of my own. So I put my heart and soul into studying for the GMAT. I bought one of these giant books that at the time came with a CD that you did practice questions in the back. I couldn't quite afford to do one of the fancy prep classes. So I taught myself how to study for the GMAT on my Saturday afternoons away from my accounting job, and was lucky enough to get into Harvard Business School. And really the reason I wanted to go to business school was because I was looking for that entrepreneurial idea. Um,
Mm.
it was a very big decision to go to business school. You mentioned in the bio that my parents were small business owners, but very practical as it came to finances and to budgeting. And my dad made me sit down and create a spreadsheet to think about what I was getting myself into. Not only did he want me to realize how much debt I was going to be taking on going to business school, but to recognize the fact that I would be out of the workforce for 2 years. And, his point was you're giving up a very good job. He called it my shingle. He said, you have your shingle, you have your CPA. This is what people work for. What are you doing? But he said, you're giving up a really good job for the hopes of something better. And that
Mm.
something better come with a pretty good hefty uplift in your salary to give up 2 years, of work and, take on this debt. So he did make me sit down and work out a spreadsheet. And of course, the spreadsheet, it was a bit laughable because while I was in business school in 2001 through 2003, September 11th happened. The
Mm.
economy crashed. There weren't a lot of great jobs for shiny new MBAs. And after business school, I made about half as much as I did before business school. But I was over $50,000 in debt on top of what I still owed to the University of Colorado for my undergrad loans. So, oftentimes your parents are right. In this case, my dad was absolutely right to make me go through that exercise, which I think at the time I rolled my eyes at. I'm glad that I did it. I'm sure you'll have questions about that. In hindsight, it was more than I thought that I was taking on. But if I had to do it over again, this was 20 years ago now, if I had to do it over again, I would. But it certainly wasn't necessarily what I thought I was optimistically signing up for, at, the ripe age of, 22.
Mm. And so, and I love that there's a parental aspect to this because I think this makes for a great case of compare and contrast.
Mhm.
So, in my experience, I was very intimidated by the prospect of incurring more debt for a master's. And my dad, he was very much the bug in my ear who just, taking his generation's lens, right? And he was like, well, that's the obvious next step. Like you majored in English, like that's not going to cut it for making a stable living. So, of course you need to go get an MBA. And like he really, really pushed that because, as all parents, they just want their children to be financially stable. They don't want to have a starving artist or see their kid potentially up against homelessness or God knows what else. So just I'm curious because in our case, I can completely admit that it caused a bit of back and forth, and we were not seeing eye to eye for a good period of years. So in you all's case, like what was that timeline, or just I guess in terms of you feeling like, okay, yeah, dad knows his stuff and being on the same page? Did it cause any strife?
No, not necessarily. I can't say that it caused strife, but there were some very spicy conversations to make
Mhm.
sure that I was making good decisions because
Mhm.
I couldn't really articulate what I wanted to do. It wasn't like I was going to law school and when I graduated, I was going to become a lawyer. I wasn't going to medical school and I was going to become a doctor. I was going to business school. It was sort of this airy fairy idea that I would find myself and maybe start a business. And my father would ask me these questions and say, well, could you do that? Could you do that now? Could you do that part-time while you're, working? Do you really have to chuck, this great career that you have? And I think it was uncomfortable for my parents because I was on a linear path. I was at a firm they had heard of. I had a business card that looked impressive. As you said, parents don't want to worry about you. And so they had already sort of checked me off the worry list and, put their attention on other things. And then all of a sudden I was putting myself back into the worry camp of, taking on more debt and going off into the world to find myself yet again. And I think that those were the moments of the spicy conversations, but ultimately my parents, trusted me. And, in hindsight, I think they probably think I came out okay, but there were probably some, kitchen table conversations when I wasn't around about, what is she doing now?
Yes, yes. Always just kind of knowing that there's some additional dialogue going on. And it's, again, all rooted from a place of love and looking out for you. But it can feel very much like a drag when you're like, I'm taking the risks and I'm taking bold action. And another thing that I'm curious about, because I, again, just not having had a master's degree personally, so I have a lot of friends who've gone through programs and just doing the research that I have to as part of my job. I see a lot of debate about the value of a master's and whether it actually is an investment or if it's more of a gamble. Because I've heard it said straight up that if you're not at a top 10 institution like a HBS, that it's really a waste of time and money, and that you are better served doing maybe a certificate program or just going on Harvard's online courses and just doing ad hoc study. So I'm curious in terms of the value add. I would imagine that you feel like it was very much an investment and that there was a direct payoff, but were there moments or was there a point in your debt payoff journey where you were like, I'd have been better off without this thing?
I think it's a very personal decision and on the individual's career path, as you mentioned, the institution that they're, lucky enough to attend. Um, on my path, I'm glad that I did it, and as I mentioned, I would do it again. But I don't know that it's for everyone. I don't know that it's a requirement. I don't know that it's something that you have to do. And I mentor some young people that in the conversations that we have, I actually counsel them not to do it because when I ask a lot of why questions, as you mentioned, there are other ways to check those boxes. There are other ways to develop those skill sets or those networks or those life experiences that will put them on the path to where their journey needs to take them. So I don't know that it's a requirement. I think there's certainly other ways to get to some of the outcomes that you would, receive. And no one's ever asked to see my diploma. No one's ever given me a test to say, how are you at, strategy or finance or something. For me, more than anything, it was the individuals that I met. I hate the word networking, but it's the network that I have. But really, they're just my friends. Just the people that struggled through this experience with me are still probably the top 10 people that I rely on, for deep friendships and for advice, even at this point in my life and my career. Could I have achieved that in other ways? Probably.
Mhm.
But I doubled down on time with these individuals. And I think that's where I became so close to them. But for me, it wasn't necessarily about the actual skills that came out of it, as chagrined as, maybe the Harvard folks would be. I'm sure those hard skill sets are somewhere deep inside me and they've come out, in ways that are important. But for me, I think it's more the individuals that I met on the path, and I probably could have met them in other ways.
That part, because that's what I think the new aginess of today allows for, like LinkedIn. I mean, my network is self-cultivated through and through. And of course, having Dartmouth is a bit of a leg up because it's like, okay, I can introduce myself and we have that common thread, but I had to hustle and I had to really turn that into something. And it did not just naturally come together like, oh, this person's here to help you in this way, or this person in this way. And so I think what you're explaining is how it's supposed to function. And sadly, what we're seeing, in the trends that we study and seeing this play out for minority communities, it's a vicious cycle, not a virtuous cycle, right? Because a lot of people, who are under-resourced, they come into school, they don't have the money to afford tuition, so they take out the loans, okay? And then they graduate, the degrees don't necessarily equate to those higher earnings, as you touched on earlier. And then a lot of people just default to, oh, just go get a master's, just go take that next step. And they treat the symptom or the problem of having debt with get into more debt because
Mhm.
of the supposed payoff. But then a lot of women turn out to, get passed over yet again still, and then it jeopardizes their ability to become mothers, offer their family stability, and then the cycle starts all over again. So with you having, kind of had the everything turn out the way that the system, should have allowed for, right? And you being a success story and being able to start a business because that involves so much risk. I'm curious as to, just your thoughts on those who are in the entrepreneurial space and they feel like they have to defer that dream because of the debt that they may have incurred and because business school may have been a damper on their pursuits. Just
Mhm.
what you would recommend, right, for being able to transcend that and leverage that network like you just talked about.
Mhm. For me, listening as you're talking, um, I did defer starting a business because I had to take some jobs that maybe weren't as glamorous or purposeful to me because I did have to get myself out of a hole that I was in. And so I did work for, I don't know, 8 years or so before starting Swell after business school. And certainly picked up skills and confidence along the way, but I wasn't able to do what I needed to do or really wanted to do right out of school because I had this number that I had to outrun. But I would say that in hindsight, I think it allowed me to create a more sustainable business because of the experience of having serviced that debt because I never raised money for Swell and I never took out any debt for Swell. And part of that was probably my nervousness of getting any more into debt because I had dealt with it. But I think part of it was because I did have that accounting background. Like margins were really important to me, making and selling a product and being profitable and not spending what I didn't have. And, the spreadsheets are always a very big part of my life. I think that definitely helped. But, in listening to you, I do think that part of what I was able to accomplish and achieve and the way that I did it was because of the journey that I had, even though in hindsight, it would have been nice not to have to go through the slog of a bunch of careers that I didn't really want to do, but I needed to, right, to pay off that time. I think it was an important part of the journey, and maybe Swell was more successful in the way that I did it because of the way that it changed me. Um,
Mhm.
but to answer your question, like what advice would I give to others in doing that is to be as scrappy as you possibly can and to ask for help as many times along the way. Like you mentioned, you had to really fight for how you built your network and using LinkedIn and even just how you found your way to me, knocking on doors and asking people. I think that's what you need to do. And, in starting Swell, I didn't have the ability to hire anybody in the beginning. It was just me, but there were a lot of things I didn't know how to do. And so I would take people out for lunch or coffee or meet them at their office and basically say, can you help me? Can you give me some advice? And here's what I don't know how to do. And here's what you know how to. So people love to help, but you have to give them those little tidbits of like how to help you and make it easy. I'm not asking you to do a ton. I'm asking you could you give me an hour? And in that hour, could you give me three other people that you could, that I could talk to that maybe I could hire as a part-time freelancer because I don't have enough for a salary, or maybe they'll do a favor for me for some future product, and that's the way I was able to cobble things together in the beginning without the fully formed skill set that I needed to get things going. And so I think the more advice I could give to people about just getting started and just asking for help, but doing it in a scrappy way and not being embarrassed about it. And just sort of, sometimes you need a little bit of humor to laugh at yourself and say, yeah, can you believe this is the way that I'm doing it? But really allow people in the inside to help you, I think is probably the best way to get started.
And I empathize with that so much because I had to swallow a huge dose of humble pie on the road to prosperity. We didn't get to chat about it in our pre-interview, but leading up to this, coming out of Ivy, right? Everyone has expectations for what your career is going to look like. I was constantly being told, oh, employers are going to be banging down your door to hire you. And everyone just assumes you're fast tracked to work at a Goldman, a McKinsey, a Bain. That couldn't have been less true for me. And I was through a revolving door of contract and temp jobs. I had to roll up my sleeves at one point once my student loans had gotten so far behind on repayment that I took work at Orange Theory and Athleta, right? I'm working sales and here I am, 2 years out of the school like that, and people are running into me from high school like, oh, hi, right? Like there's just so much humility that gets dealt your way. But I like that you mentioned the scrappiness piece because I've identified that scarcity can be a skill. And when you have absolutely nothing but your back against the wall, having to put two and two together, and with that debt sort of being the fire under you, because in transparency, I think if I didn't have that as a motivator, it's like kind of what incentive would there have been for me to keep pushing and to eventually start this venture? And so for you to have logged 8 years, right, in between getting that degree, starting what became a household name empire, I think there's just so much value in that journey. And that's what I want people to really focus on is like, don't look at the top of the mountain because yes, it's easy to celebrate, being debt free, woohoo. But when you are struggling and climbing your way up, like that's what's building the character and giving you the resources to be able to disrupt that cycle. So I feel so interconnected. Like obviously we've never met in person, but I think you exude the spirit, obviously, of becoming undefeated. And I know we're approaching time, and I would love to make this an extended, 2 hour cut, right? But just to go ahead and wrap things up, I feel like what you just spoke to certainly counts as the advice in action. But if there's anything like a quick one-liner that you want to leave, what would that be?
Oh, goodness. What would that be? I would just say to talk to as many people as possible, and if you're thinking about going into debt to go to school, talk to alumni and then talk to people in the career that you are thinking about getting into. I think people really do love to give advice and and to be really realistic about what are those opportunities and what are you thinking about.
That's excellent advice. And my only thing to add, my Breism is just evaluate if it's going to be a net negative or net positive. I know it's easier said than done, but really make sure that any education that you finance, that it is an investment and it's not a gamble, because a lot of tricky wording and clever marketing will have you think it's all one of the same, but do your due diligence, crunch the numbers, and weigh the cost, net negative, net positive. So that being said, so sad that our time together is coming to an end, but very grateful again for you lending your voice to our community and this conversation. Please, everyone, feel free to follow Sarah's journey. She's doing amazing things now. She's stepped down from Swell, but leads as an advisor and some other projects too, right? If you want to share a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm advising a number of high growth companies right now as either board member or as an advisor, and I'm really just trying to give some wisdom that I wish that I had along the way to others. I like to say that I was the poster child for what not to do, and so if maybe I could help somebody not go through the same things that I did, one or two times. I'm really enjoying being in service to others at this point.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you for doing that with us today. We are so fortunate to have had this conversation. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find another episode when we come back next Friday. Take care and keep rocking out on this debt-free journey.